Hi guys. I wanted to continue our book from the Magic Tree House, and it's called Hurricane Heroes in Texas, and we're on chapter 5 and 6. So here we go. Get it ready. All right. Rose and Lily, chapter 5. Jack and Annie staggered into the house. They were both shaking. Their shoes and stockings were gone. Their wet clothes were torn. You poor children, cried the woman. I was waiting for my husband to arrive, and I saw you clinging to that tree. Come sit down in my parlor. Don't worry about the furniture. Rest. Dry out. You're safe now. Thanks, thanks, stammered Annie. Yeah, thanks, breathed Jack. He and Annie followed the woman from the entrance into a lovely sitting room. They sat down on a sofa and tried to catch their breath. I'll get you some towels and blankets, the woman said. As she hurried from the parlor, the wind howled and rattled the door. Rain pounded the windows. Jack thought the hurricane sounded like a monster trying to break into the house. He remembered the giant waves attacking the pier, tearing apart the bathhouses. I still have our necklace, Annie said, panting. Good, good, said Jack. He had his knapsack too. He looked inside. The Texas book was ruined. Before he could tell Annie, the woman came back carrying towels and 2 quilts. She handed the towels to them, and Jack dried his hands, face, and hair. Then the woman wrapped one quilt around Jack and another one around Annie. My name is Rose, the woman said, sitting down. You must tell me who you are. I'm Annie, and he's my brother Jack, said Annie. We're visiting from Pennsylvania. We just escaped from the waterfront, said Jack. The waves got super high, said Annie. So where are your mother and father, said Rose. They're, Jack didn't know what to say. They're at the Tremont House Hotel, Annie said quickly. I know they're safe. Oh, but they must be so worried about you, said Rose. I wish they knew you were safe and sound with me. A baby started crying upstairs. That's my daughter. I'll be right back, she said. And she hurried upstairs. Rose is so nice, Annie said, and she's really strong. She pulled us both in. Right, said Jack. He was relieved to be in Rose's nice house, but he was worried about the others still out in the storm. We have to help more people, he said. I know, said Annie. We'll just rest here for a minute and figure out what to do. Rose came into the room with a baby in her arms. Lily, meet Jack and Annie, she said. Lily looked like she was about a year old. Hi, Lily, said Jack and Annie together. Lily stared at them with huge brown eyes. She had dark curly hair, and rosy cheeks. She's so cute, said Annie. The howling wind scared her, said Rose as she sat down with the baby. So what did you see out there? Huge waves, said Jack with a sigh. They were covering everything. The streets got flooded fast. Everyone was trying to escape. Oh my, said Rose. My husband, Lucas, should never have gone to work this morning. I told him. Where does he work? Asked Annie. At a music store that's just off the boardwalk, said Aunt Rose. I've been expecting him to arrive home at any minute. The Rose stood up and walked to the window and looked out. The water's getting higher, she murmured. Lucas better hurry. Jack felt bad for her. He remembered the waves destroying the boardwalk. The wind shrieked, thunder rumbled. Lily let out a wail. There, baby, don't cry, said Rose, gently rocking Lily in her arms. Think of this as a big adventure. And the gust of wind shook the house. Lily kept crying. Hush, baby, hush. Papa will be home soon, said Rose, and she started singing to Lily. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. If that mockingbird don't sing, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring. Lily stopped crying and looked at Rose. Papa, she whimpered. He's not here, darling, right now, but he'll be home soon, said Rose. She turned to Annie and Jack. Lucas sings that song with her all the time. Rose looked out the window again. He would do anything to keep Lily and me safe. I don't understand why he hasn't come back yet. What can we do for you? Asked Jack. You helped us, said Annie. We'd like to help you. Oh, you're both so kind and brave, said Rose. You sound like true Texans. She took a deep breath. I'm certain Lucas is fine. He's got to be fine. I'm certain he's fine too, said Annie. Suddenly, a huge blast of wind blew open the front door. Jack and Annie leapt up from the sofa. They rushed to the door and tried to push it closed. The wind pushed back. Jack felt water wash over his bare feet. He looked down. Sea water was streaming through the door. Jack, look out, cried Annie. The wind ripped the door off its hinges. Jack and Annie jumped out of the way as the door crashed to the floor. Seawater began pouring into the house. Chapter 6, Escape. Upstairs, cried Rose. Holding Lily in her arms, she splashed across the parlor into the stairway. Jack grabbed his knapsack and hurried up the steps after Annie and Rose. When they reached the second floor hallway, Jack heard the glass shatter below. He looked down the stairs. The first floor windows had broken. Water covered the parlor floor and was rising fast. A chunk of the upstairs ceiling crashed to the floor of the hallway. It barely missed them. This way, shouted Rose. Be careful. Still carrying Lily, Rose led Jack and Annie into a dark bedroom. She shut the door. There, she said. Shutting out the hurricane was impossible, though. The windows in the bedroom were broken. Glass was everywhere. Wind and rainwater swirled in. Jagged pieces of roof shingles blew inside. This sounds scary. Get down, cover your heads, Rose cried. Shielding Lily, Rose knelt between the wall and the bed. Jack and Annie crouched behind her. The baby buried her face against Rose. The house swayed back and forth. Jack felt water under his feet. It was seeping under the bedroom door. We need to get higher, said Rose. The roof. How? Said Jack. Follow me, said Rose. Carrying Lily, she led Jack and Annie out of the bedroom. The rising seawater had reached the upstairs hall. Rain was pouring through a giant hole in the roof. If we can just get up there, on the roof, we can get above the water, said Rose. We can climb on furniture, said Annie. Good, said Rose. The dresser, the chest, the chair. Jack and Annie pushed the tall dresser under the hole in the ceiling. They hoisted a chair on top of the dresser. Then they pushed a blanket chest against the dresser to help them climb up. Rose, you go first. Use the chest to get up onto the dresser. Then use the chair to get onto the roof. Once you're safe, we'll hand Lily up. Annie took the baby from Rose. She whispered softly to her as Rose climbed from the chest onto the top of the dresser. Careful, said Jack. Rose then climbed onto the chair. She grabbed the edge of the torn roof and hauled herself up. Now, Lily, she called to Jack and Annie. Jack climbed onto the chest, then the dresser. Then he stood up on the chair and reached down as Annie held the baby up to him. The baby was heavier than Jack expected. He steadied himself on the chair, then lifted Lily toward Rose. Jack held the baby as high as he could. Rose grabbed Lily and pulled her onto the roof. You go next, Jack said to Annie, and he stepped off the chair. Annie climbed onto the dresser. He held the chair steady, and she pulled herself up onto the roof. Jack followed. He stood on the chair and peered above the roof. The wind and rain pounded him. He felt the chair shaking, and the dresser shook too. The whole house was shaking. With no time to think, Jack gripped the edge of the broken roof and pulled himself up. He joined the others on the wind-blown, soggy rooftop. Oops. Look at that picture. That looks really scary. Battered by the wind and rain, they all crouched around the baby. They held each other tightly. The house shook beneath them. How can we get to higher ground? Jack shouted. I don't know, said Rose. Jack looked around, and in the last light of the early evening, all of Galveston seemed covered by water. Suddenly there was a loud crack. The house was sliding off its pillars. It was splitting into two. Rose cried out. Jack and Annie clung more tightly to her and Lily. There were more loud cracking sounds. Half of the house crumbled into the churning seawater. The roof over the other half broke completely free of the house, with all of them on it. Hang on, cried Annie. Jack and Annie held onto Rose and Lily as the wind pushed the roof onto the floodwaters. Lily let out a wail. Rose started singing. Her voice was surprisingly strong, and Annie began singing along as well. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. As their voices rose up, above the wind, Jack saw crumbling buildings. He saw people floating on mattresses, on boards, and even in washtubs. Jack heard cries of help from survivors on rooftops. He saw others hanging off of tree limbs. He wished he and Annie could help everyone, but there was no way to steer the roof raft. Every time the wind shifted, the direction of the waves shifted with it. The rooftop kept turning and moving with the storm waters. Lily finally fell asleep, and Rose and Annie stopped singing. "Where are we?" asked Annie. Rose looked around the dim light. She gasped. "The Gulf! I think we're heading toward the Gulf," she cried. "The Gulf," said Jack. "You mean we might end up out in the ocean?" "Oh, no," said Annie. But the wind shifted again, and the water current changed. The roof spun around and began moving in another direction. Jack didn't know what to do except hang on to the others. "Are you both all right?" Rose asked. "I'm good," said Jack. "Me too," said Annie. "Are you okay, Rose?" "I don't know," she said. "I can't figure out what to do." "There's nothing we can do," said Annie. "We have to wait for it all to end." "I think you're right, Annie," said Rose. Adrift on the black floodwaters, the roof raft rose and fell with the waves. Storm wreckage crashed against it, but the current kept pushing the raft through the wreckage. Jack and Annie held on tightly to Rose as she cradled the baby. Drifting through the storm, they all rocked back and forth together. After a while, Jack gave in to his tiredness. His head nodded and his eyes started to close. All right, so next time I am reading, it will be chapter 7 and 8. See you soon. Bye, guys.